Blackwood Ridge, a dying, isolated coal mining town nestled deep in the jagged, freezing Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over the Appalachian Mountains in the dead of winter. It isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It's the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, making you hyper-aware of your own heartbeat. When the snow piles up 6 feet high and the temperature drops below zero, the woods around Blackwood Ridge don't feel like a forest anymore. They feel like a massive, holding its breath, waiting for you to make a mistake. My name is David Vance. I am the Chief of Police in Blackwood Ridge, West Virginia, a town of less than 800 people, built entirely on dead coal mines and cheap timber. I have seen the worst of what human beings can do to each other when they are isolated, freezing, and out of money. I've dealt with poachers, meth labs, and violent bar fights. But I always approached my job with absolute, cold logic. Monsters don't exist. Ghosts aren't real. When blood is spilled, it is spilled by the hands of a human being or the claws of a desperate animal. That is what I believed, right up until the night the whispering pine spat something out that defied every law of nature I had ever known. The nightmare began on a Tuesday in late January. We were in the middle of a brutal blizzard that had completely cut the town off from the main highway. I was sitting at my desk in the precinct, nursing a cup of stale coffee, when the heavy oak doors violently slammed open. A local farmer named Jebediah stumbled into the warm lobby. He looked absolutely terrified. His heavy wool coat was covered in snow, and his face was completely drained of color. He was trembling so violently he could barely speak. "Chief," Jebediah gasped, leaning against the front desk, his chest heaving. "You gotta come out to my property. Right now." "Jeb, slow down," I said, standing up and grabbing my heavy winter parka. "What happened? Did the roof of the barn cave in from the snow?" "No," Jebediah whispered, his eyes wide and vacant. "Something took my livestock. Something tore them apart. And Chief, it didn't eat them. It just slaughtered them. For fun." My young deputy, Carter, looked up from his desk, a sudden flash of unease crossing his face. I waved him over, and the three of us piled into my police cruiser, fighting the heavy snowdrifts all the way out to Jebediah's farm at the edge of the tree line. When we pulled up to the barn, the metallic scent of fresh blood hit me before I even opened the car door. I clicked on my heavy mag light and stepped out into the freezing wind. The interior of the barn was a slaughterhouse. 5 massive, full-grown dairy cows had been completely decimated. But it wasn't the work of a bear or a pack of starved wolves. The violence was too calculated, too savage. The animals hadn't been bitten, they had been literally ripped in half, their spines snapped like dry twigs. The wooden support beams of the barn were coated in thick, freezing blood. "Jesus Almighty," Deputy Carter whispered, taking a step back, covering his mouth with his gloved hand. I didn't say anything. I unholstered my service weapon, sweeping my flashlight across the bloody hay. And that is when I saw the tracks. Leading out of the back of the barn, heading directly into the pitch-black tree line of the whispering pines, was a set of footprints pressed deep into the fresh snow. I knelt down, shining the beam of my flashlight directly onto the prints. My stomach plummeted. They weren't animal tracks. Not entirely. They were bipedal. They walked on two legs. The prints were massive, at least 16 inches long, but they were a horrifying amalgamation of anatomy. The heel and arch looked distinctly, sickeningly human, but the front of the foot ended in 5 elongated, razor-sharp claw marks that dug inches deep into the frozen earth. "Chief," Carter stammered, his voice shaking. "No bear leaves a print like that. And no man walks barefoot in sub-zero weather." "It's a poacher," I lied, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Someone wearing a rigged set of boots to scare the locals." "Go back to town, Carter. Get on the radio. Tell the dispatcher to issue a mandatory curfew for the entire town. Nobody leaves their house tonight." "What are you gonna do?" Carter asked, looking nervously toward the dark forest. "I'm going to track this son of a bitch before the snow covers his trail," I said, racking the slide of my 9mm pistol. Against every instinct in my body, I stepped past the tree line and plunged into the whispering pines. The darkness of the forest was absolute. The heavy canopy of snow-laden pine branches blocked out the moonlight entirely. The only sound was the crunch of my boots against the frozen ground and the howling wind tearing through the trees. I followed the massive, bloody footprints for nearly 2 miles, pushing deeper into the isolated mountains than I had ever gone before. Suddenly, the trail abruptly stopped. The footprints didn't fade away. They just vanished. Right in the middle of a small, snow-covered clearing. I slowly spun around in a circle, sweeping my flashlight into the heavy timber, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Police!" I yelled, my voice swallowed instantly by the vast emptiness of the woods. "Come out with your hands up." Silence. And then, I smelled it. It was an overpowering, nauseating stench. It smelled like wet, rotting dog hair, mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of fresh blood and ozone. Before I could pinpoint the source of the smell, a massive, heavy branch snapped directly above my head. I jerked my flashlight upward, aiming the beam into the dense branches of a towering oak tree. Crouched on a thick limb, 30 feet in the air, was the monster. My brain completely short-circuited. Logic, reason, and sanity shattered into a million pieces. It was massive. Easily 7 feet tall, crouched on 2 muscular, heavily furred legs. Its body was a horrifying mix of a starved, emaciated human and a rabid timber wolf. The skin stretched over its ribcage was pale and gray, but its arms and legs were covered in thick, matted black fur. Was the face that paralyzed me. It wasn't a wolf's snout. It was a distorted, mutated human face. The jaw was elongated, the mouth unhinged, revealing rows of jagged, yellow, razor-sharp teeth dripping with fresh blood. And its eyes, they were glowing. Two massive, luminescent yellow orbs burning in the dark, staring down at me with absolute, human intelligence. It didn't growl. It didn't roar. It tilted its head to the side, looking at me, and let out a sound that froze the blood in my veins. It laughed. It was a raspy, wet, guttural human laugh. "God Almighty," I whispered, raising my pistol. The creature didn't give me a chance to pull the trigger. With a speed that defied its massive size, it launched itself off the branch, dropping directly toward me. I fired blindly into the dark. Bang. Bang. The flashes of the muzzle illuminated the creature midair. I felt a massive, crushing weight slam into my chest. The impact threw me backward 10 feet, my service weapon flying out of my hand into the deep snow. I hit the frozen ground hard, all the air violently rushing out of my lungs. The beast landed silently on all fours just a few feet away from me. The overpowering stench of wet rot and copper suffocated me. I scrambled backward in the snow, desperately patting the freezing ground for my gun, knowing with absolute certainty that I was about to be torn to pieces. The creature slowly stood up on its hind legs, towering over me. It raised a massive, clawed hand, preparing to strike. Suddenly, the sharp, deafening crack of a high-powered hunting rifle echoed through the forest. The creature let out a deafening, ear-piercing shriek of pain. A spray of black, viscous blood erupted from its shoulder. It stumbled backward, its glowing yellow eyes darting toward the tree line. Then, with terrifying agility, it dropped to all fours and bolted into the heavy brush, vanishing into the darkness of the whispering pines. I lay in the snow, gasping for air, staring up at the empty sky. Footsteps crunched in the snow beside me. A rugged, bearded man wearing a heavy flannel coat and carrying a smoking .30-06 hunting rifle stepped into my line of sight. It was Elias Thorne, one of the best trackers in Blackwood Ridge. A man who had lived like a ghost on the edge of town ever since his 10-year-old son, Billy, went missing in these exact woods a decade ago. Elias looked down at me, his face grim, his eyes completely hollow. "You shouldn't have come out here, David," Elias rasped, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "Bullets don't stop the things that live in the dark." What the hell was that, Elias?" I gasped, clutching my bruised chest. Elias stared into the pitch-black woods where the monster had disappeared. He slowly lowered his rifle, his knuckles turning white. "That," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with a horrifying mix of terror and profound grief, "is the thing that took my son. Fear is a physical weight. When the adrenaline finally burns out, the terror settles deep into your bones, making every muscle in your body feel like it's packed with lead." I didn't speak as I followed Elias Thorne through the blinding, sub-zero blizzard. My chest was throbbing with agonizing pain where the beast had slammed into me, every breath tasting like cold copper. We trudged through the knee-deep snow of the whispering pines for what felt like hours, moving entirely by the dim, sweeping beam of Elias's flashlight, until the dark silhouette of a log cabin finally emerged through the whiteout. It was Elias's home, sitting miles away from the town center, right on the bleeding edge of the deep timber. A single, blindingly bright yellow porch light was burning through the storm. Elias kicked the heavy oak door open and dragged me inside, violently throwing the deadbolt and dropping a massive iron crossbar into place. The cabin was suffocatingly hot, heated by a massive cast-iron wood stove roaring in the center of the living room. Sitting in a rocking chair facing the front door was Martha Thorne, Elias's wife. Martha was a woman completely hollowed out by grief. She was wrapped in a thick wool shawl, staring blankly at the iron-reinforced door. When we burst inside, covered in snow and blood, she didn't even flinch. She just kept rocking. "Did you find him, Elias?" Martha whispered, her voice fragile and dry as dead leaves. "Is it time for supper? The porch light is on. He knows the way home." "Not tonight, Martha," Elias rasped, pulling off his frozen heavy coat and throwing his rifle onto the wooden dining table. He walked into the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of cheap bourbon and a rag. He's playing in the snow a bit longer." I collapsed into a heavy armchair, completely exhausted, clutching my bruised chest. "Elias, what the hell is going on? What was that thing? You said it took Billy." Elias poured a heavy splash of bourbon onto the rag and walked over to me. He pressed the stinging alcohol against a deep, bleeding scratch on my neck that I hadn't even realized the creature had given me. "I didn't say it ate him, David," Elias said quietly, his voice trembling with a decade of suppressed, agonizing guilt. He pulled up a wooden chair and sat across from me, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows across his scarred face. "I said it took him. The spirit of these woods." "Spirit?" I scoffed, my police training desperately trying to reassert logical control over the sheer insanity I had just witnessed. "Elias, I just got tackled by a 7-foot-tall wolf that laughed like a grown man. I am calling the state troopers. I am calling the National Guard." I reached for my police radio clipped to my belt. I pressed the transmission button. Static. Thick, heavy, unbroken static. "The storm knocked out the repeater towers on the ridge," Elias said, taking a long drink straight from the bourbon bottle. "We're cut off, David. Nobody is coming up that mountain road until the plows get through on Thursday. It's just us." "Then tell me what I just shot at," I demanded, leaning forward, the pain in my chest flaring. Elias stared into the roaring fire of the wood stove. "There's an old curse in the Appalachian coal towns," Elias began, his voice dropping to a heavy whisper. "Older than the mines. Older than the timber mills. The native tribes called it a lot of things, but the old miners called it the stray. It's a predatory spirit. It doesn't have a body of its own. It waits in the deep freeze of the woods, looking for someone who is lost, starving, and terrified. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. 10 years ago, my boy Billy wandered off the property chasing a wounded deer. The blizzard that hit that night was worse than this one. The search parties looked for 3 weeks. They found his red winter coat, but they never found his body. Everyone told me he froze to death. But a father knows, David. A father knows when his blood is still walking the earth. Martha's rocking chair creaked rhythmically in the background. Creak. 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 3 years ago, I tracked a massive predator that was wiping out the local deer population, Elias continued, his hands shaking as he gripped the bottle. I cornered it in a cave up near the summit. I had my rifle aimed right between its glowing yellow eyes. I was ready to pull the trigger, and then it spoke to me. My blood ran completely cold. It spoke. It didn't just speak, Elias choked out, a single tear cutting through the dirt on his cheek. It looked at me, and it said, "Daddy, it hurts." It was Billy's voice, David. Coming out of that monster's throat. The stray didn't kill my son. It possessed him. When Billy was freezing to death in the snow, that ancient, starving spirit offered him warmth, and my terrified 10-year-old boy let it in. The spirit mutated him. It stretched his bones, grew that thick black fur to survive the cold, and warped his mind into a feral, bloodthirsty predator. "You knew," I whispered, absolute horror dawning on me. "You knew what this thing was for 3 years, and you didn't tell anyone." "He's my son." Elias suddenly roared, slamming the bourbon bottle onto the table. "How do you shoot your own child, David? Even if he looks like a monster, even if he's buried deep inside that thing. I thought I could cure him. I thought if I brought him deer meat, if I kept him fed, the spirit would leave him. It slaughtered 5 cows tonight for sport, Elias." I yelled back, standing up, ignoring the agonizing pain in my ribs. It's not just eating to survive anymore. The spirit has completely taken over. Billy is gone. The thing out there is just wearing his voice like a mask. Before Elias could answer, the heavy, rhythmic creaking of Martha's rocking chair suddenly stopped. The silence in the cabin was deafening. The howling wind outside seemed to pause, holding its breath. Martha slowly stood up from her chair. She walked past us, her eyes wide and glassy, and pressed her face against the frosted glass of the cabin's front window. "Martha?" Elias asked, his anger instantly evaporating, replaced by raw panic. "Martha, step away from the window." "He's home, Elias," Martha whispered, a sickeningly sweet smile stretching across her pale face. "My baby is finally home." From the other side of the heavy oak door, Something massive shifted its weight against the wood. The floorboards of the cabin groaned under the sheer physical pressure. Then, we heard the scratching. It started low, near the bottom of the door. The unmistakable sound of 5 razor-sharp, elongated claws slowly, deliberately dragging against the thick timber. Skrrrt, skrrrt. I instinctively dropped my hand to my empty holster, cursing myself for losing my pistol in the snow. I grabbed the heavy iron fire poker resting next to the wood stove. Elias scrambled backward, snatching his hunting rifle off the table and racking around into the chamber, aiming it dead center at the reinforced door. "Go away!" Elias screamed, his voice breaking. "Leave us alone." The scratching stopped. For 10 agonizing seconds, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and our own rapid, terrified breathing. And then, a voice drifted through the thick wooden door. It wasn't the guttural, demonic laugh I had heard in the woods. It was small. It was fragile. It was the voice of a terrified, freezing 10-year-old boy. "Mama," the voice whimpered, trembling with cold. "Mama, it's so dark out here. I lost my coat. My fingers hurt, Mama. Please open the door." It was the most psychologically devastating sound I had ever heard. It bypassed every logical defense mechanism in my brain and struck directly at the core of human empathy. I knew, rationally, that a 7-foot monster was standing on the porch. But my ears were telling me a child was freezing to death. Martha let out a guttural, heartbroken sob. "Billy!" Martha screamed. She threw off her wool shawl and lunged toward the front door, her hands frantically reaching for the heavy iron crossbar. "I'm coming, baby. Mama's coming. Martha, no." Elias roared, throwing his rifle to the side and tackling his wife around the waist. He dragged her away from the door as she violently fought him, kicking and screaming, completely blinded by a mother's desperate, agonizing grief. "Let me go. He's freezing, Elias. He's my baby. Let me go," she shrieked, scratching at her husband's face. "Daddy, why are you locking me out?" the voice pleaded from the other side of the wood. The pitch was perfect. The terrified inflection was flawless. "I'll be good, Daddy. I promise I'll be good. Just let me in by the fire." Elias was openly sobbing now, using all his strength to hold his thrashing wife down on the floor. "It's a trick, Martha. It's not him. It's the stray." The entity on the porch realized the psychological torture wasn't going to get the door unlocked. The illusion of the freezing child instantly vanished. The voice deepened, dropping into a terrifying, dual-layered demonic roar that shook the very foundations of the cabin. "Then burn in the cold," the monster bellowed. The heavy oak door violently exploded inward. The sheer kinetic force of the impact shattered the iron deadbolt and splintered the thick crossbar like matchsticks. The door tore off its iron hinges, flying across the room and smashing into the kitchen counter. A blinding swirl of freezing snow and violent wind tore into the suffocating heat of the cabin. Standing in the shattered doorway, silhouetted by the howling blizzard and the single yellow porch light, was the stray. Up close, in the light, it was even more horrifying. The emaciated, gray skin pulled tight across its ribs, the thick, matted black fur covering its limbs, and the terrifying, mutated, unhinged human jaw dripping with thick, black saliva. The creature didn't look at me. Its glowing, hyper-intelligent yellow eyes locked directly onto Elias and Martha on the floor. It stepped over the shattered door frame, its massive, clawed feet clicking against the hardwood floor. It let out that low, wet, guttural human laugh again. I gripped the heavy iron fire poker, my knuckles turning white, placing myself directly between the monster and the grieving parents. I was a cop. I didn't have my gun, I didn't have backup, and I didn't have a prayer. But I was the only thing standing between an ancient, starving Appalachian curse and a family that had already lost everything. There is a moment in every violent confrontation where the brain stops trying to rationalize and simply surrenders to pure, primal instinct. I didn't see a 10-year-old boy standing in the shattered doorway of the cabin. I didn't see a victim of the Appalachian cold. I saw an apex predator that had come to slaughter us. The freezing blizzard whipped into the living room, instantly turning the suffocating heat of the cabin into a biting, icy vortex. The creature, the stray, stepped fully into the light of the roaring cast-iron wood stove. It was horrifyingly massive. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its head grazing the wooden support beams of the ceiling. The thick, matted black fur on its limbs was crusted with frozen blood and snow. Its elongated, mutated jaw snapped shut, and it stared at me with those burning, hyper-intelligent yellow eyes. "Step back, Elias." I roared over the howling wind, raising the heavy iron fire poker like a baseball bat. "Get Martha into the kitchen. Now." But Elias couldn't move. He was still kneeling on the floor, holding his weeping wife, staring up at the monster that was wearing his dead son's face. The creature didn't lunge. It tilted its head, a sickening, calculated movement, and let out a long, ragged sigh. When it spoke again, it wasn't the demonic, dual-layered roar that had shattered the door. It was Billy. The voice was so perfectly, devastatingly human that it made my stomach physically churn. "Daddy," the creature whimpered, its massive, clawed hands twitching at its sides. "Why did you stop looking for me? I was so cold in the dark. The tall man in the woods said you didn't love me anymore." "Billy," Martha sobbed hysterically, trying to crawl toward the beast. "My baby, I never stopped looking. I left the light on. I left the light on. Don't listen to it, Martha," I yelled, stepping closer to the beast, trying to draw its attention away from the grieving parents. "It's a parasite. It's just using his memories. The stray's glowing yellow eyes snapped toward me. The illusion of the frightened child instantly vanished. The jaw unhinged, dropping down to its collarbone, and a deafening, metallic shriek tore through the cabin. It closed the distance between us in a fraction of a second. I swung the heavy iron fire poker with every ounce of adrenaline in my body, aiming directly for its skull. The iron bar connected with a sickening crunch against the side of its head. The impact sent a violent shockwave up my arms, nearly dislocating my shoulders. The blow would have instantly killed a normal man. But the stray barely flinched. Before I could recover, the creature backhanded me with its massive, clawed arm. The sheer kinetic force lifted me entirely off my feet. I flew backward across the living room, crashing spectacularly into the heavy wooden dining table, shattering it to splinters. I hit the floor hard, tasting hot copper in my mouth, my vision instantly tunneling into a dark, fuzzy gray. My ribs were definitely broken now. Every breath was pure agony. The creature didn't follow me. It turned its attention back to Elias and Martha. It slowly stalked toward them, its claws clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. "You left me to rot, old man," the stray hissed, the voice distorting, blending the terrified 10-year-old boy with the ancient, starving spirit of the woods. "Now, I am going to peel the flesh from your wife's bones while you watch. And then, I am going to eat your heart." Elias Thorne finally snapped out of his paralyzing grief. He looked at the towering, horrific monster. He looked at the glowing yellow eyes, the rotting gray skin, and the jagged, bloody teeth. And in that exact moment, the tragic, desperate hope of a grieving father completely died. He finally accepted the horrifying truth: his son was gone. Billy had died in the snow 10 years ago. This thing was just a parasite wearing his corpse. Elias didn't reach for his hunting rifle. He knew bullets wouldn't stop an ancient Appalachian spirit. He reached for the half-empty bottle of cheap bourbon resting on the intact half of the shattered dining table. "You are not my son," Elias whispered, his voice vibrating with a cold, absolute, and terrifying resolve. Elias grabbed the bottle by the neck, stood up, and violently hurled it directly at the creature's chest. The glass shattered against the stray's emaciated ribcage, soaking the thick, matted black fur in highly flammable, 80-proof alcohol. The creature roared in confusion, taking a step back, the strong scent of the liquor masking the smell of wet rot. "David!" Elias screamed at the top of his lungs, his eyes locking onto mine across the room. "The stove. Break the stove." Through the haze of pain and near unconsciousness, my police instincts took over. I didn't question him. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the heavy iron fire poker off the floor, pushed myself to my knees, and desperately swung it at the massive, roaring cast-iron wood stove sitting in the center of the room. I hit the latch on the stove door perfectly. The heavy iron door swung open, and a massive cascade of burning, white-hot coals and flaming oak logs spilled out onto the hardwood floor, directly at the creature's feet. The stray realized what was happening a fraction of a second too late. It let out a terrified, guttural screech and tried to leap backward toward the shattered front door. But a massive, burning ember caught the bourbon-soaked fur on its leg. The reaction was explosive. The alcohol ignited instantly. A blinding, roaring column of bright orange fire engulfed the towering creature. The sound that came out of the beast was not human. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of an ancient, parasitic demon being violently purged from the physical world. The shriek vibrated so intensely it shattered the remaining unbroken windows in the cabin. The creature thrashed wildly in the center of the room, its massive claws tearing at its own burning flesh. The thick, black fur melted away, exposing the elongated, mutated skeleton beneath. "Elias!" I yelled, dragging myself across the floor away from the spreading flames. Elias had grabbed Martha, shielding her eyes, pulling her into the safety of the kitchen as the living room became an inferno. The stray stumbled backward, completely consumed by the roaring fire. It crashed blindly through the shattered front door, plummeting off the porch and out into the freezing, howling blizzard. I forced myself up, limping to the broken doorway, leaning heavily against the splintered wood. The creature was a brilliant, screaming torch of fire thrashing in the knee-deep snow. The intense heat of the flames fought a violent war against the sub-zero Appalachian storm. For 30 agonizing seconds, it burned, its shrieks echoing through the dead timber of the whispering pines. And then, the screaming abruptly stopped. The massive, supernatural body collapsed into the snowdrift. The flames rapidly died out, hissing violently against the ice. The wind howled, burying the blackened, smoking remains in a thick layer of fresh, pure white snow. The suffocating, heavy pressure that had blanketed the woods all night instantly vanished. The unnatural silence of the forest was replaced by the normal, natural sound of a winter storm. The stray was dead. The ancient curse of the coal town had finally burned out. I slid down the doorframe, collapsing onto the porch, staring out into the dark, snowy abyss. Elias walked out a moment later, a heavy wool blanket wrapped around his shaking shoulders. He didn't look at the blackened scorch mark in the snow. He just looked up at the freezing, starless sky. "He's finally warm, David," Elias whispered, tears freezing to his cheeks. "My boy is finally warm." The storm broke 2 days later. The state snowplows finally pushed their way up the mountain road to Blackwood Ridge, followed closely by the state troopers and the paramedics. My official police report was a masterpiece of logical fiction. I wrote that a massive, rabid black bear had wandered down from the summit, starving from the harsh winter. I wrote that it had slaughtered Jebediah's livestock before breaking into the Thorn cabin, where Elias and I had fought it off, resulting in the bear catching fire from the overturned wood stove and fleeing into the woods to die. The state troopers bought it. They found the scorched remains in the snow, bones too blackened and shattered by the intense heat to accurately identify, They chalked it up to a tragic, violent animal attack. Martha and Elias moved out of the cabin the very next week. They packed up their belongings, drove down the mountain, and relocated to a quiet, warm town in Florida. Before they left, Elias came to the precinct. He didn't say a word. He just shook my hand, his grip tight and full of a silent, profound gratitude. I am still the chief of police in Blackwood Ridge. I still deal with poachers, meth labs, and violent bar fights. I still rely on logic, evidence, and the law. But I am no longer a skeptic. I know exactly what is waiting in the deep, freezing dark of the Appalachian timber. I have triple reinforced the heavy oak doors of my house. And every single night, when the winter winds start howling through the whispering pines, rattling the glass of my bedroom window, I make absolutely sure that my porch light is turned completely off. Because if you leave a light on in the dark, you never know what kind of voice is going to ask you to open the door.